everybody, and welcome back at the virtual lecture series Digital Documentary Practices, Topical Paradigm Shifts in Negotiating the Real. Today, it will be already our fifth and our last session, but no worries, after the break, we will be back in the next winter semester with a second round of virtual lecture series. After 5 inspirational sessions, ranging from theories of interactive documentary within and beyond documentary tradition, metamodernism, polyphony, and nonlinearity, ranging from the epistemic value of iDocs, its political impact, to its societal potential, we will round up the semester by meeting all of these concepts again in our closing lecture. As the title and the abstract reveal, today's session will be all about smartphone filmmaking, about the theories of mobile and pocket filmmaking, but also about the practices. Probably all of us have already used their smartphone for recording short videos. However, there is much more to the seemingly vernacular practice than one might guess at first sight, as our today's guest, Max Schleser, will explain. Without spoiling what Max will delineate with much expertise and experience, let me shortly shift our analytic lens to some of the specific affordances of mobile media making and their relevance in the field of iDocs in general and participatory interactive media in particular. As Max, together with Camille Baker and Kazai Mologa, have pointed out in their article titled Aesthetics of Mobile Media Art, there are mainly 4 aspects in the creative use of mobile media film. First of all, there's the innate performativity of movement, the gestural quality of the device. Secondly, we have the portability factor, the watching and shooting anywhere, which makes the mundane interesting. Thirdly, the specific perspective of viewing the world through the camera, or the camera vision of the phone, changes one's perspective also in a metaphorical sense. And fourth, smartphone films are often very intimate. There is a specific expressivity of the handheld device, and there seems to be a predilection for close-ups. To these 4 aspects, which Max will certainly talk more about in a minute, I would like to add a 5th aspect, an aspect which, thinking back to the sessions we had so far, and within the scope of participatory co-creative media, having in mind, there is the network capacity of mobile media making. This affordance seems to me to be a key interest in our lecture series, given the focus on co-creativity and participation. Mobile media making shows both a networkedness and a networking quality, a deep entanglement or interminglement, as Judith has put it. Of course, this specific affordance might be a point of departure for discussion later. Still, I would like to suggest that in general, what we understand when speaking of mobile media are not only portable media, but media that are most often also networked. This affordance then makes networking possible, the sharing and going public. And given the opportunities of social media, mobile media makers can reach out. They can connect locally, but also globally, or hyperlocal, as Kat Zizek puts it. This makes mobile, smartphone, and pocket filmmaking not only a global phenomenon with distinctive festivals, filmmakers, and creatives, but it also defines it as an original film form, a formation of new storytelling approaches, as Max announces in the abstract of his lecture. In the following, Max will invite us to explore different approaches towards smartphone filmmaking, providing us with a survey of the international smartphone filmmaking community, a framework for the analysis of smartphone filmmaking, outlining also recent developments in emerging media and screen production, such as extended reality, and he will give us some insight into the impact of smartphone filmmaking on adjacent disciplines. This comprehensive overview, with also first-hand insight, is based on Max's broad background and long experience as a media scholar and a practitioner. Max Schleser holds a BA, MA, and PhD degree in art and media practice. Currently, he's associate professor in film and television and researcher in the Center for Transformative Media Technologies at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, Australia, which is also the reason why this lecture is scheduled outside the usual time slot, due to the time shift between Australia and Europe. Otherwise, it would have been pretty late for Max, or pretty early for us. Apart from his academic career, Max is a Adobe education leader, founder of Mobile Innovative Network and Association, the MENA Pro, and screening director of the International Mobile Innovative Screening and Festival. Due to both his academic, theoretical, and artistic creative expertise, Max is a sought-after conductor for digital storytelling workshops and has designed events for a number of cultural institutions, city councils, and government bodies in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. His industry consultancy includes projects for Adobe, Australian Red Cross, BBC, Nokia, Frontier Strategy, Open Lab, and Telstra, among other agencies and production companies. Foremost, however, Max is an award-winning filmmaker with expertise in immersive media, with a focus on cinematic VR and interactive filmmaking. Max's experimental films, moving images arts, and cinematic VR projects are screened at film festivals, in galleries and museums, and his mobile feature film, Max with a K, Tai, is included in the Public Film Archive in the Forum of Images in France. And his smartphone documentary feature, Frankenstorm, from 2014, has been broadcasted on CTV Canterbury Television in New Zealand. In his research, Max explores screen production, emerging media and smartphone filmmaking for community engagement, creative transformation, transmedia storytelling, and Max co-edited several books, among them Mobile Media Making in the Age of Smartphones and Mobile Story Making in the Age of Smartphones, both published with Paul Graf Macmillan. Apart from that, he edited journals for Ubiquity, for the Journal of Pervasive Media, and the Journal of Creative Technologies. His monograph, Smartphone Filmmaking, Theory and Practice, from which he will give us some insight, is quite hot off the press, having been published in fall 2021. Hence, to make a long list short, Max belongs certainly to the most renowned thinkers and makers of mobile media. And hence, without much further ado, welcome, Max.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for a really great introduction. And yeah, let me just dive into it. I'll share my screen. And here we go. It's the first presentation after the summer break for me. So if I wind down at some point on my computer, just give us a second. It's pretty hot here. And really, you mentioned some really great points in the introduction, which I think is some of the things that I'm really passionate about. And I think these sort of things really demonstrate the impact of smartphone filmmaking now in this, currently ever evolving, changing mediascape. And the first article that you mentioned, this is, it's quite some time ago, but I think one of the key things that I'm trying to do also with this lecture now is to make us understand that we need to look into the early mobile phone films to really understand conceptually what makes a good smartphone film. So I'm always thinking that not every film would be a perfect smartphone film, but that there is, certain ideas, especially working with communities, if you're working in the idea of co-creation, if you're capturing locations, the best camera is the one that you get in your pocket. So yeah, very keen, very great that I can be part of this lecture series for documentary into digital, and follow up from some really fantastic lectures that were before. And so I'll talk today a bit about the creative practice of smartphone filmmaking and some of the publications that resulted out of it. As always, of course, we start with an acknowledgement of country in Australia. And just to let you know, for some people who might not know, that today is Australia Day. So it's a holiday in Australia. And, the university is closed. No one really works. But some of my colleagues are not that happy about Australia Day. There's some people that give it a different definition. They don't like this term. They don't think the date has been chosen right. So it's, it's quite a contested in a way. And when I've been doing my workshop, which is working with indigenous communities at Swinburne University, I think that there's a lot to be learned and said and acknowledged about the history of Australia. So some colleagues were also saying, what can you do if you don't like, I mean, Australia is a great place. I really enjoy living in Melbourne. There's lots of good things about Australia, but of course, we're thinking about Australia Day. Some of my colleagues were also saying, well, if you work on, Australia Day, that also maybe says something about your positioning. So, I'm working today. I just want to flag this up as, it's a very politicized space. And yeah, I think there's, I'm not an expert in this area, but, I think we just have to be very sensitive with this. So, of course, I respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which Swinburne University's Australian campuses are located in Melbourne's east and outer east. And that's also where I'm joining you from today. We pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. We are honored to recognize the connection to Wurundjeri country, history, culture, and spirituality through these locations, and strive to ensure that we operate in a manner that respects and honors the elders and ancestors of these lands. We also respectfully acknowledge Swinburne's Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander staff, students, alumni, partners, and visitors. We also acknowledge and respect the traditional owners of the lands across Australia, their elders, ancestors, cultures, and heritage, and recognize the continuing sovereignties of all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander nations. Yeah, if you had any other questions, about this or any feedback, and you maybe see this recording, always feel free to reach out to me. So on Twitter, I'm Max Mobile, because I'm quite into mobile media generally, and yeah, particular smartphone filmmaking, and I'm very interested in the creative transformation aspect in the process of filmmaking. If you'd like to see some of my work, I finally managed to get a new show reel on my website, which is schleser.nz. So yes, that is a German surname, and like my website, I've been hosted in New Zealand for quite some time. So I'm also a New Zealander. That's where the NZ is there, and quite proudly like to keep it there. And then I run MINA, which is the Mobile Innovation Network and Association. And it started out in New Zealand, Aotearoa. So first we called it Mobile Innovation Network Aotearoa, and it was a very collaborative project. But then it grew substantially, it became very international. And so MINA kept moving around different places. And so at the moment we're working with China, with the Mobile Studies Congress, to run the next Mobile Studies Congress, hopefully in December. Last year we had sort of I guess you could call it hybrid, a blended approach with an online component and a symposium, festival, congress, and a screening at ACME, the Australian Center for the Moving Image, and of course some great participation from some colleagues that I see here in the forum as well, which is really great. There's a snapshot of some of the pictures, and so I think the smartphone filmmaking or mobile phone filmmaking is something that that really caught my interest when I was that time, becoming a filmmaker and making my first projects. And I thought, rather than buying a new camera, I can maybe just get a mobile phone, which you get with your mobile phone contract, and I could use that budget to do things with communities and travel to places. So in 2007, I first uploaded my first micro movies. And in 2013, I got into also editing on iPhone 4. And yeah, it's a really evolving space. And so I think, especially for working in collaboration with NGOs, there's some great projects that I've done, like in the middle is Eva Ine Toa, for instance. Some of my projects are quite more experimental. So that means you would see them in, rather in the gallery context or in experimental film festivals. So which is, on right side, that that snapshot there of Midtown, which is the one film from 2013 that was filmed and edited on an iPhone. Because these days, you see some people on YouTube and they say, "Oh, I just made an edited a smartphone film on my iPad." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, that's it's not like the latest thing anymore. That's I think now a standard, what we can do." And I think that, of course, working with communities, there's lots of, I think, great interesting things that it's not also about the technical capability to edit on an iPad, but it means you can edit on location. So it means you can screen on location and you can make the decisions with the community before you move to an editing lab or before you send the files and then do the editing. So there's lots of, I think, creative elements in the mobility aspect of this. And overall, like, thanks again for the great introduction. I've made around, a dozen short films and then some sort of more collaborative projects. And at the moment, I've got 2 cinematic VR projects that, hashtag COVID delay are finally out. And I thought, I sort of just very briefly mention 2 projects from 2013, or I filmed Frankenstorm in 2012 and 2013 to really like talk a bit to the documentary context. One is a feature-length work, one is a short film. Frankenstorm was about the impact of Hurricane Sandy on the Jersey Shore, and I was a research fellow on Monmouth University, and I arrived in the US, and I saw this landscape of imminent permanent destruction when I went for a run after, like, get over my jet lag. And I talked to one of my colleagues, Anna Massoni, and said, "I need to make a film. This is like, you see these houses that are half destroyed. It's really crazy." And like, of course, Monmouth is the Jersey Shore, so there is no major city, there is no major broadcasting station. So the Frankenstorm, the hurricane came, lots of news coverage, then the hurricane left, and like there's no more attention. And there's people that live in a freezing winter and they didn't really know what is happening to them. Is there like, does the insurance pay their mortgages? Does the insurance pay their houses? They still have to continue paying the mortgages, families living in motels. People didn't know what was happening. And so really crazy. And I mean, of course, at that time I lived in New Zealand, and there were lots of similar stories that resonated from the Canterbury earthquake. And so, which, these sort of things are like in your, on your sort of, you feel very sensitized to them. And I think that's why that film, it looks like a more traditional broadcast documentary. It did also quite well at Canterbury TV. It was like, I think, replayed 3 or 4 times. It's a very similar story. So, in the US, people had like a yellow sticker on their house, and I think in New Zealand, a red sticker, which means, is your house going to be torn down? Can you rebuild? Is it safe to rebuild? And so, while this documentary looks very much like, a documentary that you could have approached in a very traditional way, it really emerged out of the idea of co-creation, and so, or like collaboration. And, I think the key thing for this work was that I used an app. That was the first time I developed an app, which was really like, it's quite complex as well. Or like, not so, I used a web platform, which is very similar to Instagram. So I didn't develop it, but I like, customized it, so to say. And, Instagram was launched in 2010, and then like, Facebook purchased in 2012. So at that time, there was different other apps around that tried to do the same thing, which is like geolocation image tagging. And I had this app, which was from a Kiwi developer, and he was very happy for me to let it explore. And so by using this app, I could then share this through social media at Monmouth University with the students. So this means within 2 days, the location scouting was done, because people will just tag the different locations where they think I should go and, start capturing my video. As you can see there in the picture. And the other thing which was really important for me, it was also the idea that I could ask people and almost have like, the sort of star or like voting system, where I could like ask, whom do you think I should talk to? And so there was like people had still living through the impact of the hurricane, and they're like, "Oh, you have to talk to this person. My friend knows someone had this crazy story." So finding all the interviewees, so to say, was also in that way, in that respect, co-created, because then it was a decision by the community. So it was not me as a filmmaker who went and said, "Oh, I'm going to talk to this and that person," but it was through the community voice that I could make a collaborative decision whom to interview. And I think that was quite important for that work, because it was also a film for the community at the Jersey Shore at that time. And so, of course, you know, the filming was done in you know, a very short time. I think almost like over 2 weeks. You know, not full time, but like, you know, like almost a week filming every day. Not every day, but then, you know, so like, you know, between 7 and 14 days, which I think for a feature film is pretty good. And if there would have been more time, I would have liked also to really like develop further that participatory element, which of course nowadays is very like, you know, straightforward with like, you know, people submitting short video extracts and these sort of things. The other project, Eva in the Tour, was produced in Rarotonga, so the National Council for Women, and on the islands it's the biggest NGO. And they had Rarotonga TV produce a documentary about them, and they were not very happy with it because it really didn't demonstrate their work to let them show it from their perspective. And so, learning just a little bit about before going to Rarotonga, it's a very patriarchal society, and the National Council for Women does some really great work to break these things open. So, I talked through some. New Zealand, of course, has a very great connection to the Pacific. And so they were very keen to have some emerging filmmakers to do this work. So I went there and I took also some you know, some young filmmakers from that time Massey University with me. And our idea was really to work with the National Council for Women, with the NGO, to set up smartphone filmmaking workshops. But the project really took another turn, and like you know, 2 days after we were on Rarotonga, we were invited to the ministry to do an interview with the minister. And so, because Rarotonga isn't a very big country or place, you know, you can drive around the island 30 minutes or 30 minutes this way, and you know, you've seen the majority of things. So the word got around that we were there very quick. But for us, it was very important that while we couldn't hand over the camera, so to say, we could really produce a work with the National Council for Women, get a screening on location, and so could then also do a rough cut before we left and went back to New Zealand Aotearoa, which meant we just had some fine tuning to do. And I think that was some, you know, we could ensure that we make the work from the perspective of the NGO rather than about them, but make it with them. And the work has been helped, the documentary has been helping them, I think, in quite some respects to, like, you know, have been screened at various conferences and various festivals to really, like, you know, get their work out. And of course, working with the smartphone, it's very much a great idea, because like for both of these projects, it's me talking to people. And when you practice a bit, even just holding the camera like this, you can maintain eye contact to the people and you can talk to the people. And so it's, in that respect, it's me as Max talking to the people, and they're like opening up. So you don't put like massive, you know, lights or like, you know, really big microphones in front of them. For 2013, Eva in the Tour, it's really fantastic that for the first time you could plug in XLR microphones to our iPhones. So that meant we had really like broadcasting quality sound. And for Frankenstorm, I just used a small directional microphone, and I had to, like, you know, in the editing, a bit of support to clean up the audio, which of course nowadays is even easier with wireless microphones. So you can just, you know, pop like in a wireless microphone, like a wireless GoPro on someone and have some interviews. I think there's still, I did some work recently in rural Victoria, and I think people like still asking me, no, so where's your camera? And I'm like, no, I'm using the iPhone, you know. And it's sort of, I think it's a different perspective for some people when they talk to you as a filmmaker with an iPhone or with whatever smartphone you have. And if you get there with like, you know, kind of like, you know, a big camera with a big lens, and, you know, sort of you're hiding behind that. So like sort of big on a tripod. And I mean, if you practice, you can do some pretty good handheld work, you know, even if you just get a small tripod or monopod, you know. I think that still is a different perspective for, I think, lots of interviewees. But I really want to talk a bit today about MINA, the Mobile Innovation Network and Association, and I have to do some updating on the slide. So the website just got MINA 2022 announced. We also have, as you're in China, we also have a call out through S Filmmaker, which is like a film freeway, which we get in you know, here in, you know, in the Western world through, like, of course, financial markets world, through like film freeway, which is a submission platform. And of course, there's like a bit of like you know, things happening on Facebook and Instagram with a bit of community building for smartphone filmmaking. And I think the key thing for MINA, for me, is always not to just screen films, but also have a conversation about smartphone filmmaking. So, you know, what is smartphone filmmaking in this particular year? yes, of course, it's really exciting because Apple keeps bumping up the tech space. That means there's different aesthetic approaches. But I mean, Apple at the moment makes all these like, you know, advertisements about the macro. You know, one of our sponsors, Truman Optics, we had macro lenses. So just one of my works from last year, I used macro filmmaking, you know, before having the iPhone 14. So you can, there's different approaches. You not always need the latest iPhone to make a good work. That's what I'm trying to say. But there's always lots of things happening. And of course, you know, Soderbergh helped with this Unsane to like, you know, really push that $2 million budget. And that was, of course, having lots of audio in the post-production. But still, it's the same camera that we are using, right? So, and the other thing, of course, which Anna mentioned in the beginning, I think, which is really great, is in MENA, when you go to a screening, we invite different filmmakers. We always try to invite people from, like, you know, if you're in Melbourne or if you're in China, Ningbo, people from that locally that can talk to their films, or at least we have a video presentation. So last year we had Darcy Yeville, who made a feature film, which is called One Punch. And yeah, it's a feature film, but it very much uses documentary aesthetics if you think about the production of the work. And you know, he could then talk to his film, which I think is always great to us. But also, if you're in the audience, you don't really know who the person next to you might be, a smartphone filmmaker, or it might be a future smartphone filmmaker. And so that also, I think, is something in terms of the curatorial aspect, I think is quite key, that, you know, you sort of need, I think, a smartphone filmmaker to do this curation element, because this is such a fast-moving space, and you sort of need to, I think, really follow the trends and directions. But I mean, we're very stoked that we can be at ACME, which I think is a place to be in Australia for Moving Image, which is the Australian Center for the Moving Image, right at, you know, the Museum of Film Culture in you know, Flinders Street in Melbourne. But we've done also some other interventions. So we work with Urban Screen TV, which means we have we show our projects in public screens through the Urban Screen TV network, which is Australia, New Zealand, internationally. Or we have done some things like I think probably the biggest, you know, the biggest audience response through Serendipity we had at the Fringe Festival, which was literally a projector on a car with a generator. And then if you're in Wellington on a Friday night, you walk past Cuba Street, and we sort of projected this, so you can see the picture in the middle onto a car park. And I think so many people stopped and, you know, like at least spent a couple of hours there. So then, you know, like it is in New Zealand, Aotearoa, you know, you had at one point the police arriving, and we're like, oh, like, uh-oh, you have to close it down. They're like, no, we just help you to make sure that the traffic is going smoothly, you know? So it's like, because there's so many people. So I think smartphone filmmaking is a really, like, you know, it can be in different various places. Also for the screening. The picture there, we can see a panel discussion, which is Hilary Davis from the Social Innovation Research Institute. So we did some really great digital stories. There's Jason van Genderen. There's a smartphone filmmaker from Australia. He just got Screen Australia funding for his documentary about his mother with dementia. And of course, it's an iPhone film, but he doesn't talk about it as an iPhone film anymore. So that's, I think, you know, also really a great sign for the next level. There's Adrian Jeffs, which is a Melbourne award-winning filmmaker, and also like a really great MENA colleague. And then that's me on that chair. MENA is always a trip around the world. So we try to have at least one film from every continent. There has been no smartphone films being produced in Antarctica as well. I've written in my book about that. But, you know, some really fantastic projects, from the health crisis in Tanzania, which you can see that picture there, to you know, more experimental work. And I think the great thing as well is there is always some people that come back to MENA. So there's, like, you know, some very particular filmmakers that are very interested in MENA, because MENA has gone the full circle. It started in a very experimental domain and then opened up. Now there's like around, if you look at Film Freeway, there is around 32 smartphone film festivals around the world, which means MENA can go back to its niche and be the experimental smartphone film festival. Yeah, and of course, also with MENA, it's the idea of working with other smartphone film festivals. So that's something that I've become a bit of interested in terms of the area of film festival research. Is sort of in the book, Smartphone Filmmaking Theory and Practice, I want to put some emphasis on the film festival directors, because it's like being an independent filmmaker. There's lots of work, there's really lots of passion projects. In some countries, there's no funding for these things, but people still do it because they really believe in it. And I think that needs some, you know, a bit more attention, so to say. But we also run workshops, and one of my favorite workshops here was at the St. Kilda Film Festival, which was, of course, a very, like, you know, it was a room full of independent filmmakers, at sometimes very critical, at sometimes very tech savvy. So we could talk about, Max, what about the audio, and sort of, it was really like, a quite specific audience. St Kilda Film Festival is in Australia, the longest, running short film festival that there is really the independent film festival. And so it was really great to have that audience to, give them, consider, maybe if you're not filming everything with a smartphone, maybe think about filming some segments of your project with a smartphone. And there's now even some fantastic software that does the color image matching for like a red camera or for like, a black magic camera, whatever you're using. So the smartphone can become like, a key production element. And of course, like, if you're filming out and about with a smartphone, it makes lots of things easier than if you're there with a, a full-length camera, so to say. But of course, we also do workshops with Mina. So we can see here some projects for the Spirit of Rangatahi, which was in New Zealand. Was a great project with some Maori and Pacific youth. We did some project with the Goethe Institute on eco-smartphone films. It's a really fantastic project. And I did some projects with some colleagues from Media and Communication at Swinburne, the Social Innovation Research Institute, with senior citizens. So the model that we have, whether you're 16 or 60, it works. So that's sort of the idea, is that helping people to become storytellers and getting the domain of telling your stories and editing these stories on your own devices. And of course, I think also, like thinking now with Google Carports, there's some opportunities also to engage certain creatives or even audiences into like XR. I mean, people don't like Google Carports, but still, like, with 10, 15 bucks, you get a VR experience. So the screening programs, they're online as well. We don't do out like trophies, that sort of stuff at Mina, but we put lots of work into our programs. So every year on our website, you can find a trailer and a program. And that is now really a record for the last 10 years of, if you want to find out who are these smartphone filmmakers, that's the starting point. We used to do DVDs in the beginning, now we've got some of the films on the education shop. Last year, we were working with Excerpt, an online platform. So, it's really like trying to sort of, there's always different things that we're also exploring with the dissemination. So like, probably like next year we'll do some stuff with NFTs, who knows, and so I think it's always not only doing the innovation or let's say alternatives in the production, but also like, trying to, of course, help to promote these films as one curated screening element. And of course, you could say, oh, you find some of these films online, but yes, the screening program is curated, and it means also there is in Mina, there's a fantastic group of judges, peer reviewers. So every film has been viewed by at least 2 members of the Mina committee, which are also all listed in our programs. And so I think it's a different thing than trying to find some films online or have this 1-hour curated program. And yeah, what Anna mentioned, there's actually another edited collection. It's just out now, was announced, I think, at the beginning of this year, 2022. So the first one was mobile media making in the age of smartphones, and then mobile story making in the age of smartphones, and now out, yeah, from January, mobile storytelling in the age of smartphones. And it's really sort of what the vision of this project. It's now like 3 in a row, so to say. As you know, academic publishing takes time. So we, especially the last one was COVID. There was quite a few delays, but I think it was really great that we had the support from the publisher and also of our colleagues having, really the drive to push it through, and the patience, depending on what happened with, COVID hit us in, in different countries. So, which, it's a very international project with colleagues from China, Bangladesh, so that, we could sort of, develop it, and everyone was like, really great. But the key thing with this project is it's going to be a bit broader and really thinking about the impact that mobile media and when working with videos and digital stories can have on other disciplines. So mobile media making in age of smartphone explores aesthetics, space and place, knowledge, and stories and the self. And the edited collection examines how representation and experiences are shaped and through creative practices and digital ethnographies of new visualities and socialities. Mobile story making in age of smartphones further developed this discourse and continues to define creative mobile media. So I'll just give you, a quick quote from the book. Story making can contribute to formulating democratic processes and equity, which are imperative to create change and challenge traditional modes of media production and consumption. And so by means of embracing, creating, collaboration, and curating, which is mobile media making, this edition analyzes making spaces and making change. And then the third edition, we try to go, it's done in collaboration with a colleague in China. We try to be really interdisciplinary in terms of mobile media and also very international. So we included mobile news storytelling, vulnerable communities and social innovation, mobile creative arts, and mobile education and translation. And so mobile education translation is not really like that specific on the storytelling, but if you imagine about the possibilities that in the future with live translation, it doesn't really matter in which country you are, these stories will be able to be, told, and the translation just happens for you. I think there's something really exciting about this for storytelling, that language is, not like a sort of a barrier for us to sort of, communicate. And of course, the idea of community is really what is the social innovation element in all of these three books. What I want to talk today about to you is smartphone filmmaking theory and practice. And so very much what I sort of try to say in the beginning is that I'm really arguing for more personal or more authentic stories that are surfacing, that there is no greater access to storytelling, and that is also a community engagement strategy. And smartphone filmmaking is a global phenomenon with festivals in Asia and Africa. And so that sort of needed to be brought together into one perspective. Theoretically, there's been a bit of work being done. So like, in my PhD, I explored the idea of a mobile mentry, the mobile mentry, which is from 2011. Some colleagues in Canada have worked with the idea of the cell films from 2016. In the UK, Atkinson did a bit on mobile cinema. And then Barry in Australia, 2017, did sort of some work on mobile filmmaking. So, these come from different theoretical approaches. So like cell films is more about participatory visual methods, community-based research. Barry explores more co-presence and so the intermediate between on and offline. And yeah, she comes from an, I think, background of digital ethnography to that field. And then the mobile cinema from Atkinson is sort of very much about the, mobile viewing experiences. But for me, smartphone filmmaking theory and practice was really about the creative process in smartphone filmmaking and looking into, I think, what is important when you study film, it's production, distribution, exhibition in one ecology. And I think the key thing for me is that when we talk about different genres, so to say, of a particular film, we compare this to other films in that particular genre. But I think that never happened in smartphone filmmaking. And so this is now exploring smartphone filmmaking in film form of its own right. And if we go a bit through the historic approach, so to say, we can of course see that there is some festivals that emerged in 2012, and there is a bit of mapping about these festivals, and which ones are still around in 2018, and then also looked into the sort of the new ones. And so we can see that there are some festivals that have been running for quite some time, which I think is really fantastic to see. The other thing is sort of maybe like skipping over some of these things now, just for keeping some time for questions in the end as well, is what I mentioned before. I think it's really important to study some of the early films, because what we can see that some of these qualities that resonate in the early films, so from whether it's from Iran Kaganov, which is some SMS Sugarman. So again, it's a narrative film, but it very much works with documentary aesthetics, or from 2008 from a Cyrus Frisch, a Dutch filmmaker. Why didn't anybody tell me that become that bad in Afghanistan? Or from Mark America from the US. We can see, which is called Immobilité. we can see that some of these ideas are still resonating in contemporary smartphone films. If we talk about the intimacy, if we talk about the immediacy of mobile media. And also, I think it's really amazing to see that mobile filmmaking went through these waves. So the first, like, let's say, what I call pioneers, like Matthew Neil Todd, Iran Kaganov, or myself, we just sort of wanted to see, can we make a feature film with a mobile phone? It was part of a creative process, of course. And it was also like making sure these films look very different because we wanted them to look very different. But then, of course, some filmmakers that really like, are very well known, like Mark America or, Adam Kozov, Moscow Diaries, like they had access to any other camera, but they decided to very much, choose a mobile phone for, these sort of particular mobile specific reasons. And so the other thing which I try to do a bit as well is to highlight some of the films that were like, really presented in France at so very much the same time, where some very prominent filmmakers started to make mobile phone films. And that is one part of the project in Mina, of the book, is where I look into all the films that were screened at Mina. So when you look at the last 10 years, 11 years now. And of course, when we look at this body of work, that's sort of, so many different and so many diverse smartphone films being there. I then was thinking about, well, how can we really structure this project, and how can we really like understand the nuances in smartphone filmmaking? And so, of course, in documentary theory, one of the key texts that is still very well received is, Bill Nichols' The Modes of Documentary, or very much more recently, the iDocs. Great to see Judith there. The interactive modes of documentary. And so I thought this worked very well for documentary. It worked now very well for iDocs, which is, a very, again, like another very well received book, very well received book. And I'm sure, like, I mean, the people that are in the audience know, I'm sure everyone knows, but it's like some of the people in the recording, you get the expository, the poetic, the observational, the interactive, participatory, reflexive, performative mode. And then in the iDocs, you get the conversational mode, the hypertext mode, the participative mode, and the experimental mode. And I think everyone, like Nichols, as well as Aston, Godenzi, and Rose, everyone agree that these are not like these categories are not like exclusive, or they're not like define everything as that. There's also, of course, crossovers in these categories, and they're not like absolute, so to say. But they are a starting point for a conversation to look at what is happening. So, like to quote Nichols, dominant is not the dominant in a given film. They do not dictate or determine every aspect of its organization, but it's very much in a form of giving a good overview. And so that for me was an idea that I thought like it worked so well in interactive documentary, it worked so well in documentary more generally. So I can do a similar approach to talk about smartphone filmmaking, because when we talk about any type of creative art work, so whether that's an a piece of design or whether it's a film, you normally talk about a piece of art from that same genre, or we talk about a film from the same genre. Smartphone filmmaking has always been discussed in relation to other films, and I thought that is not really like the way that we sort of should do this, but we should talk about smartphone films in relation to other smartphone films. And so how can we do this if we develop these particular modes? And so the way that I termed them is the poetic and experimental mode, the participatory and engagement mode, the smartphone native mode. So native, I'm meaning here that it's like native video online. So it's all on an iPhone or smartphone, and the conversational mode. And then another one, which is red carpet in your pocket, which is sort of the narrative, storytelling mode. Maybe if just very briefly, and I have to say, I'm also, as a filmmaker, very interested in experimental films, so that's probably why I start in a way with the poetic and experimental modes. I'm a bit biased, leaning towards that, but I think it's also, really great to see that now experimental works can resonate beyond that like gallery or exhibition format, because it can also be the museum. So it can be like, online, it can be semi-permanent, it can be very much ephemeral. And I think that's sort of where really like experimental film can live. And also I think maybe smartphone filmmaking can help bring experimental films in the future. Participatory and engagement mode, of course, all about co-creation, collaboration, and community engagement. And of course, there's opportunities that participants or co-creators can contribute in the creative process. And thinking there about the dissemination is no longer about the final part of the project phase, but also allows participants to produce and have a voice in these projects. The smartphone native mode, I think, is very much thinking about what happens if a film is entirely produced, filmed, and then edited, and then uploaded from that computer to the internet, so that it's never seen a desktop computer. And so, like I mentioned before, I think there's some really interesting things about what happens if you edit on location rather than sending your files to an editor who sits in a dark editing room somewhere in a different part of the world, maybe. So very much like an artist taking an easel to sketch on location. I think that's sort of what happens in maybe some film experimental forms now. And of course, also really great to see that some festivals have some new categories for this. So some festivals call this made on mobile. And then there's a conversational mode, which I think, to remember that the smartphone for the first time was really the fusion of communication and lens-based media. And so, of course, that has some fantastic ideas to establish a dialogue through storytelling. So if there's a particular subject that is important, through making a smartphone film, that might enable a future conversation about this. And the accessibility of smartphone filmmaking, of course, means that we can, open up the idea of storytelling to way more voices. And then the red carpet in the pocket is very much thinking about, Hollywood conventions that are reapplied in smartphone filmmaking, and that's adopted the terminology from Karl Bardosch and the International Mobile Film Festival. So just gonna very briefly jump through these categories, but all the detail is in here. And the poetic and experimental mode, and there's three works just from a Swedish filmmaker, Absent, a homage to Maya Deren, which traditions smartphone filmmaking very clearly in the context of experimental film, but also some some of this work like The Big City, which was sort of microscopic filming and then using street sounds, I think creating some really interesting new cityscapes, literally. And then some smartphones can go anywhere, so some films that have been filmed in the ocean. The participatory and engagement mode, Yours and Mine from Anna Massoni, so like from 2007. So the word selfie became part of our like understanding sort of more or less in 2013, or it was the word of the year. But the work from 2007 from Anna Massoni is really interesting. So she has four we don't really know who they are, but they just share moments of their life. We can see immediately that there's something going on. So it means the participatory engagement mode can take us into a story world. The smartphone native mode, second row, you can see a couple of projects, which I think is really fantastic to see that they're also very visually aesthetic explorations that have never seen a desktop computer. So it's filmed and edited, uploaded from your computer on, just on the mobile. The conversational mode, there's also a great quote from the French theorist Odin, who very much says that cinematic language has become part of our daily communication. And it's very much a bottom-up approach. It's sort of very much about a horizontal approach, enabling any maker to start a conversation. And there's two examples here of two films from two stories, which is about a refugee from Syria. And then there's another film, Tofu Man, about immigration in Australia. And they're these sort of films where, you've got characters that tell you stories, and they sort of really like open up these sort of really important social issues to you. So that's sort of, they start a conversation about a subject that's quite important to have. And then you've got some examples here from the red carpet in your pocket mode. know, some films that are very successful, short films and as well as feature films. So many things to talk about, so little time. So one of the things that I think is quite important for me is in the creative approach for smartphone filmmaking, one can follow some very traditional approaches. So you can see here a still image from which was the film Bubbles Don't Lie, which is from Etrish from the Czech Republic 2015, or like The Life and Death of an iPhone from 2015. And this slide, so, you know, you can sort of do the selfie style approach, or you can do a traditional approach where you know, have the camera on a tripod using lights and microphones. So I think both is possible for what you are trying to achieve with your project. For me, it's not an either or. And I think that is something that is a fantastic creative strategy to have these different choices. And yeah, very briefly, some also reviewing some of the smartphone film festivals. Some of, you know, Momo in Switzerland, SF3 in Sydney, the festival in India, which is the longest running festival, 1 year longer than MENA, the African International Smartphone Film Festival, and the International Mobile Film Festival in San Diego. So that's Susi Botello, Mobile Motion in Zurich, Switzerland is Andrea Holle and Simon Herrocks. SF3 is Angela and Ali, and then the African International Smartphone Film Festival is Michael from Lagos, Nigeria. And it's also very interesting to see that some of the smartphone film festival organizers are also filmmakers. So I think it's part of that space where you are a director, curator, but also a maker. And same with the audiences, you know, like everyone that is coming to SF3, for instance, is hoping to be inspired to be a future filmmaker. I then have interviewed some smartphone filmmakers, and my choice for smartphone filmmakers were on one side, some people that have been somehow affiliated with MENA, but also made a choice that I wanted to choose smartphone filmmakers that have picked up a smartphone and decided to stay with smartphone filmmaking. There's lots of filmmakers that sort of make a film on a smartphone and then go back to a traditional camera, which is fine, yeah. But I think there's now a few filmmakers, so Gerda Semmer from Canada, she's from Belgium but lives in Canada, Filippo Cardona from Colombia, Camille Baker, who's from Canada but lives in the UK, or Conrad Ness, who was, you know, sort of winning, I think, more than 50 or 80, I have it in the book, can't remember now, like awards for his sort of Tarantino style smartphone films. But all of these filmmakers, or like digital artists and creatives, have very much decided to work with mobile media. I think that sort of is, you know, the idea that is now their camera of choice. And then I also look into the creative industries to so very much make the argument that smartphone filmmaking is a reality for us, right? It's also an economic reality. There's companies like Adobe developing Adobe Rush, so which means that this new generation of YouTubers or TikTokers can edit in the vertical. There is companies that develop lenses. There is Jason Van Genderen, who has a production company that is all mobile. Also Luma Fusion. So an interview with one of the editors to really sort of see how they as entrepreneurs developed a mobile editing app. And Benoit Labaudret, who is really a film festival director, maker, educator, and consultant, who has been working for a long time in the world of mobile and now smartphone filmmaking as well, to sort of develop and show how smartphone filmmaking can also support, you know, what we mentioned before, the impact on other disciplines and the you know, the social economical development. Some projects that I just sort of think are just really amazing to you know, just give you some inspiration, which is this sort of new thing of underwater cinematography. So there is Oceans from Luis Eduardo, or there is Rob Layton from Australia. That's sort of what they do is they do underwater iPhoneography. There is equally exciting, I think, and really amazing is there's a whole group of mobile musicians like Martin Koshoko in Melbourne, so who make music just on iPads and mobile devices. And there's one project from Angelo Cicciaccio, I think it's a Italian designer that lives in France, who travels I think a whole year around the world making a film, and he edited all on a mobile. He used some other cameras as well, but it's sort of this idea of like, you know, being on the go. And then the second part that I do in the book is I look back into my modes and look into films that are not from MENA, but from the world of smartphone filmmaking generally. And yeah, sort of, review these according to these different categorizations that I give. And some fantastic work here from, I think you're a bit pushed with time, so I won't go into the details, but Bali with Hinterlands, for instance, or A Humanity installation from Pavel and Casting Taylor. They had a fantastic documentary you might know, Leviathan, with the GoPro and fishing boat. They did a fantastic work, A Humanity, where they filmed with a lens into the Japanese cities that were locked off after the atomic nuclear disaster in Fukushima. They're now doing some really interesting work in the sensory ethnography lab at Harvard. There's night fishing from the Park Chan-ko brothers. So they won the Berlinale in 2011 with the best short film, The Golden Bear, with an iPhone film, or a work from Geisbühler 2012, who made homemade spacecraft. So he sent an iPhone on a weather balloon into the stratosphere, which is the picture on the top right. So there's some, that experimental and poetic mode. There's some work that is happening in the world out there, which I think is is really amazing, that enabled through smartphone. There's Red Carpet in the Pocket. There's a couple of feature films that I review: Uneasy Lies the Mind, Blue Moon, which we screened at MENA 2 years ago, and what I think is also really smart in terms of storytelling, that they're produced on one location. So using a smartphone, but there's also like the idea of like being very clever about the choices that you make, what type of crew that you use. So for instance, Blue Moon, Steph Harris, director, is also a police officer. So he had access to police officers to help him with the police cars in his film. And so again, he was like saying working with a smartphone was easy because they're not trained actors, so they're not worried about the camera. So it's, working with smartphone is technology, but also making smart filmmaking choices. And then some films that I'm really excited about, some documentaries that were screened at the Berlinale. So they premiered all at the Berlinale, and their films, they could have not been produced with a standard camera. And I think that's where really we come into the space now where smartphone filmmaking has become really excited. So one film, which is called Selfie by Ferrante from 2018. So he sort of asked 2 teenagers in Neapel, I think, to the details of the book, to film the whole project in a selfie mode. And I mean, I saw the film at the Berlinale on a big screen. I was sitting in the cinema right in the front. It looks very different than any other film that you would have seen, because it's all done in the selfie mode. But after 5 to 10 minutes, you think you're the friend of these 2 guys, which is, I think, Pietro Orlando and Alessandro Antonelli, or the producers now. Sorry. And so it's more, I would more talk about it than an Instagram or like in a Facebook feed than a film, but it's really authentic, and it also portrays a community from an inside perspective rather than the filmmaker going to make a film about the community. So I think that's some really interesting work. It's also being like disseminated through Arte. So like I think it's really fantastic to see. There's a film, Midnight Traveler, which was about a family on the refugee journey from Afghanistan to Europe. And so the whole family was part of the filmmaking. The Midnight Traveler, you see in the screenshot there was a filmmaker. But when he had to flee Afghanistan because the Taliban put a bounty on his head. But I mean, that's what you do, I guess, when you're a filmmaker, you document your journey. But I think it's a very moving film because the whole family, at some parts, the daughter is filming. I think you could see in the beginning, like there was like a little one sticking her head up there. I think it's, again, you become so close, attached to the family because you can become an insider in that family. It's a very moving story. Or Saudi Runaway, which is produced by a Swiss-German filmmaker, and Susanne Regina Moiris co-created the story with a young woman named Mura, who she met online, and she escaped her forced marriage. And so Muna documented the whole journey herself out of the forced marriage until she sought asylum in Germany. And again, that sort of film couldn't have been produced with a camera, right? Because then, people would have known that something is going on if she would been filming. So very interesting projects that have now received National Geographic funding by art, and did the whole film festival circuits. But more significantly, I think, is the storytelling and creative approach was possible through the mobility of the smartphone camera. Yeah, and then there's a couple of projects that are like the sort of social media space that work very well for the conversational mode, but sort of I think don't have enough time for that. Just very briefly, I give you some sort of takeaways or some other like things that I think are just most people don't know about, which I think is like quite interesting to see that there's now film festivals that are like, for instance, here the picture that you can see on the left, Verti Films in the Czech Republic, which screen films just in the vertical format. So it's a thing, and of course the domain I talk a little bit more about music videos as well. And I talk a bit more about collaborative projects, also some of the projects that I was involved in, and a bit about, how we shifted from, Web 2.0 to Web 3.0, or now maybe to Industry 4.0. And yeah, also thinking about, what could be one of the futures. So if you think about 360 video production, most of the 360 video cameras are controlled through a smartphone. Because, that's where you press pause and play, that's where you review things. So I think smartphone filmmaking can also make a contribution to the immersive media space and thinking about the conceptual ideas that we established. The last thing I found really interesting is there is a platform which is called Cinezen, and they sort of are thinking about the decentralized peer-to-peer marketplace, which sort of everyone becomes like a video store, and they're using smart contracts to license these films. And that led me to the research that in Russia, there is a filmmaker, Boris Golds, who made 2 feature films, Fagotto and We Look Good in Death from 2018 and 2019. And he licensed his feature films as smart contracts on this platform. So, which I think there's also something interesting about the dissemination for communities if you think about this as a new ecology. But yeah, watch the space. So I think that's where I want to leave you with it. So remember, the best camera is the one in your pocket. And if you've made a film, I think please feel free to share it with us at Mina. Thank you.